All right, everyone. Hello and welcome back. My name is Dan. This is Dan's Astrology. Thank you for tuning in today. It is January the 23rd, 2026. And at the moment of recording this video today, if you look at the chart I have up on the screen, I am recording this with the moon at the 00 degrees of Aries, which is the solstice, not the solstice point, the equinox point. The important equinox point that is the focus of so much attention for a number of reasons, because people who don't know anything about astrology will tell you that astrology doesn't work or isn't real because it's based on, the tropical astrology anyways, is based on anchoring this point at a certain point of the zodiac and making that the beginning of Aries. Well, this is when, if you want to know what it's like when the moon is at this point, this is a perfect example. And I was just noticing this is interesting because this is going to be my only chance to make a video like this before the Saturn and Neptune conjunction, which is the biggest conjunction of the year, moves into Aries, which is going to be happening very shortly. And so I'm just going to show you what this looks like. And here's the moon in Aries. And as we progress further, Neptune here will be ingressing into Aries at the 00 degree on the 27th of January. And then as we keep going, we get to the full moon in Leo that's happening on the beginning of February. As we keep going, we have Saturn at the last degree of Pisces, and then Saturn ingresses into Aries. There you go, at the 14th on Valentine's Day. That is interesting that we have a Valentine's Day Saturn ingress into Aries. How about that? So it's a big one, and I am recording this, of course, in the aftermath of the World Economic Forum, which I have to admit, I honestly, at this point, I'm going to limit my political analysis in this video. I'm going to try to stick to the astrology, but it looks like it'd be a bit of a gong show. It looks to be a pretty, at the same time, there's also the Jack Smith hearing happening in America. And if you pay attention to the overall tone of what is going on, of just like, if you're just imagine that, try to take a neutral perspective and just sort of compare the vibe from like one of these, this one event to that other event that are happening at the same, it's like, it's a gong show out there. What can I tell you? And I'm going to I'm just going to, but before I get into this, I'm going to stick to the astrology, and I'm going to just show you that we already had a taste of this. If we go back to last year in the summertime, here we go. Saturn and Neptune ingressed into Aries last year. Okay. And because do we have this retrograde thing? Here we go. Saturn and Neptune's in Aries last year. Because we had this funny retrograde thing, it sort of feels like we're stuck in a loop, right? Like there's a lot of sort of like bullshit, perhaps. Like there's something about Saturn and Neptune, to just use the idea of bullshit for a second, that you know what? I have to admit, something happened recently where if you look at some of my old videos that I did for this channel, sometimes I would record my videos in my bedroom where I set up a big bookshelf, and I'm been collecting books to read and trying to better myself through learning and literature and stuff like that. And in the process of doing so, I have this sort of attitude that a lot of people like say, well, instead of collecting lots of books, you could just support the public library system. But for me, it's just maybe if I lived closer to the library or there's something about it with my reading habit, I tend to just like to collect books and have them for years and then like take really I have a different sort of pace at reading, and I might collect a whole bunch of like nonfiction books. And then for example, I have this Carl Jung book here. If you can see this, this is something I've been reading. I used my last video I read from. There's some other. I've been I'm gradually kind of going through a lot of things that kind of curious about and been reading, and maybe sometimes I might be interested in some philosophy, right? Like some Plato. And Plato was famous for this idea of the cave, right? That there's and this the Plato's cave idea formed the basis for this Gnostic myth that you see in the Matrix, that you see in Dark City, that you see in the Truman Show, all this kind of stuff. And it's kind of interesting. Recently, one of the things that happened is that Texas, the University of Texas, banned Plato, not because of this part though, but because of a certain wokeness of a story. If you ever seen that movie Headwigs and the Angry Inch, they used a song that was inspired by some thing in Plato. But the thing is that it was a character that wasn't Socrates. That like Socrates in Plato interacts with all these characters, and you have a whole cast of characters who a multiplicity of people who say and different things. And it's like just because it's sort of like thing is like it's kind of just because there's something in the grand work of Plato that might be considered as woke, that taints the whole thing basically, right? It's kind of interesting because it's like the idea of purity, Saturn and Neptune, and also with ignorance, right? That there's like if you have this kind of like you're gonna have ideological purity. But you're enacting your purity out of a kind of an ignorance where you sense one thing that irritates you, so you have to like omit the whole thing and then enter into this whole project into a state of kind of blind ignorance because there's certain things about it that irritate you, right? And then with Neptune, people often associate Neptune with like drugs, intoxication, like coping mechanisms, like or the bullshit, right? Coming up with some bullshit lie, a bullshit story, or like comforting yourself with a fantasy, a make-believe, a fairy tale. Like, I mean, not to say that there isn't value to that stuff. There isn't value to fairy tales and make-believe and the imagination and all of this. But simply, there's this thing that it's like there's an omission of Plato in Texas going on. And Plato, one of the things that Plato was talking about was this idea of like the simulation theory, or I mean, not to literalize it as the simulation theory, but which gets portrayed as the simulation theory in the Matrix is essentially Platonism, right? And so there's also what comes out of the Matrix in the red pill, blue pill thing is essentially started with Plato. Back with Plato saying that like if you are chained up watching the projections on the screen, that what you're taking for reality is like you've been taking a certain pill, and the other pill is to break free from your chains and go outside and see the light of the sun, which is to be freed from these illusions or whatever, right? The problem is that there's this obvious thing that they don't want you reading Plato. Right? So they don't want you breaking free from the trains, going out and seeing the light of the sun. They want you to be thoroughly chained up and transfixed with this sort of funny puppet show that you're believing to be real. Now, with that in mind, it's kind of interesting that out of all the gong show that happened in the World Economic Forum, there's a lot of talk about Mark Carney's speech. This is the guy, mind you, that the politician that I voted for. And I have to admit that there might be a lot of people watching that might not like Mark Carney because he is a banker, right? And this is the whole thing, is that where I come from, I'm a West Coaster. I come from a family of working class people that are generally left wing. Although I guess if you go to the extended family, you got all sorts of people who might have different country. Like most families may have your uncle that you would get into fights with at Christmas or Thanksgiving. You know what I'm trying to say, right? We're all kind of mixed up, right? But my family's pretty left wing family. Where am I going with this? The bankers. The thing about this is that my exposure to what you might say the counterculture, hippies, or even like folk politics, there's a certain period of time where when trying to deal with the sort of like what is left of the counterculture, being like old hippies or punks or like activists or whatever, you might run into a lot of like bearded like old guys playing acoustic guitar, and they're like, "Yo, man, it's the bankers. It's the gangsters, man. The bankers are the gangsters, and like we're gonna lead the revolution, and we're gonna tell everybody about it, and they're gonna pamphlet and like the thing is that you've got a bunch of guys who are like just really, this is sort of thing about like men who like to play acoustic guitar, who like to smoke like weed and then like talk and gab and like basically take up a lot of like space and just like verbalize and just be very expressive. And there's something about this where it's like in the general arena of leftist politics, there's this move to be like, we're going to give these guys are like this because they've been reinforced by a culture that gives them the privilege them with the first spot, right? One of the things that I was interested in anticipating this ingress of Saturn and Neptune, maybe I'll hold on. After it retrograded anyways, right? It retrograded back into this kind of area. This third decan of Pisces, where Saturn is, this is the decan where Kurt Cobain had his Saturn placement, right? And everybody knows Kurt Cobain is famous because he committed suicide in the 27 Club thing. He, which is like the same age that Jimi Hendrix killed himself, interestingly enough, because this is the thing, Jimi Hendrix is also a Seattle garage rocker, basically, right? There's something about this that and then also there's also Jim Morrison, but there could be that Jim Morrison faked his death and just decided to leave behind the whole rock star life, right? Although, so there's this thing about Kurt Cobain specifically, and the 27 thing is that like the young rock stars who pass away before they reach maturity, because they cannot handle their Saturn return, basically, right? This is the astrological meaning of why Kurt Cobain killed himself, basically, was that he couldn't handle his Saturn return and what his life would be like but the thing is all these, obviously Dave Grohl got very popular afterwards with the Foo Fighters, and there's all sorts of like Kurt Cobain was originally potentially a member of the Melvins, but the Melvins didn't. There's an early version of Nirvana that was basically the Melvins and Nirvana in a undifferentiated blob kind of thing, right? Like that these were just guys who would hang out and make music, but apparently Kurt Cobain was too mentally ill, had too many problems for the Melvins to want to be in the band. But the sort of ironic thing is that the more the band that is better for longevity and making a lot of music, there's a sort of and being more stable long term was the Melvins, but the mentally ill Kurt Cobain was the one who shot to superstardom. And part of this you have to understand is that if you look visually at what Buzz looks like and what Kurt Cobain looks like, is that Kurt Cobain is like a pretty blonde boy, right? And this is one of the whole things about Kurt Cobain's like whole shtick of what he was doing with Nirvana was that with the celebrity culture, if you are if you're going to have an advantage if you look like you're a member of the goddamn Aryan race, right? This is what the whole Sydney Sweeney bullshit was about. And this is I've been kind of thinking about the Sydney Sweeney thing for a while, because we have this whole culture that's like, first of all, instead of talking about politics in a way that's meaningful, people, I think, well, I don't know. The point is that we live in a liberal society, and living in a liberal society means that if you want to spend your time, like, you're going to make a podcast, and if picking out of all the problems that we have right now, you're going to focus on the American Eagle Sydney Sweeney jean commercial and talk about the racist messaging in it. Like, might people criticize that as like there's other things to focus on. But the thing is, in a free liberal society, if that's what feels most compelling for you to talk about, it's entirely your prerogative to choose that topic and investigate it if that is what is appealing to you. And actually, I'm kind of thinking that instead of dismissing that altogether, instead of trying to solve like the big picture issue of what is going on with a solution that's going to give you some immediate quick fix to the problem, it's probably not going to work that way. So you might as well take your sweet ass time and go over some of these details, investigate some of the smaller things. And this thing about like Sydney Sweeney being a blonde girl, and the whole blue jeans thing and the joke about jeans, there's something about it where I had been going through this phase. What I'm trying to touch upon is this is obviously a difficult time. It's obviously fairly depressing, but there's this thing about Kurt Cobain. If you go back to the very first Sub Pop debut, Bleach, the very first track on that album is called Blue, right? And there's something about how the World Economic Forum had so much of that blue. And then you've got like the visual images of it with Donald Trump there with his red tie, or like, and then Mark Carney all dressed in black, but there's this overwhelming blueness of it all, and then also the subtle like racist coding of like the Sydney Sweeney and blue jeans, and blue being kind of a blue collar, working collar, being like, and then the whole idea of the World Economic Forum being the financiers, the bankers that are managing the debts and all this and a lot of this whole fucking bullshit about Greenland, about all this, about Venezuela, about all this. This is all because America is running a huge fucking debt, and they're basically desperate to find a way to solve this problem that is that that and this is they're desperate. This is what you're seeing is basically the acts of desperation and childishness. The problem is there is a certain kind of bullshit, obviously, to politics. I'm not going to deny that, right? There is a certain bullshit factor to everything. And, well, what am I saying? I'm kind of getting distracted here. I'm going to go back to the Kurt Cobain, Sydney Sweeney thing. The thing is about the Kurt Cobain, Sydney Sweeney thing is that instead of taking bands that are probably more stable and are going to last longer, and you're going to take the most mentally ill people that are basically like immature blonde childs that you are investing with all this libidinal energy, right? There's another song like this. I think Kurt Cobain was basically playing off this whole thing where it's like, because I'm a privileged white guy and I have blonde hair and I'm attractive and I might look good on a magazine cover and a music video or something, I don't actually have to try very hard. And his whole shtick was just like, fuck you, I'm just going to be like, you're gonna. And the problem about this was that there's this kind of like, there's this law of reversed effort where there's this kind of punk rock attitude of not trying very hard. And like, this is the funny thing about this is there's this whole culture war dynamic kind of thing going on where people have this idea where they're like, I think Kurt Cobain was kind of like the prototype for creating a straw man for the left, right? Because there are all out of all these like artists that you could choose. Well, the thing is, this is kind of funny. Is like, was it artificial, Nirvana's success, Was he selected by some big A&R guy, cherry picked to be the superstar that would be like the Britney Spears of rock music, basically, right? Like, this is kind of like the thing. Like, can you imagine, like, after Kurt Cobain's death, "Hit Me Baby One More Time" and the Backstreet Boys and like that culture, not to mention Lou Pearlman, all that are how that whole industry works versus like just taking one blonde teenager from the tradition of Seattle garage rock, of which Jimi Hendrix was kind of like the idol, the former, but like even Jimi Hendrix existed in a musical ecosystem where all the little girls wanted to see the Monkees and they didn't like Jimi Hendrix. You know what I'm saying? So there's this kind of thing about like the um this it's kind of like it's all very cheap and obvious and like like as a trashy consumer product that people should just kind of get. Maybe it doesn't, maybe to take time to sit with it just kind of highlights how stupid the whole thing is, right? um what am I trying to say here? So after this, after the whole Kurt Cobain thing in the 90s, right, we get new metal, we get we get Nickelback era music, all this kind of stuff, which is kind of like the grunge aesthetic, but with the Kurt Cobain problematic quality sort of removed and sanitized away, right? There's something. Um, what we're dealing with here, anyways, is the sort of anxiety around the breakdown around meaning making, right? Or this idea of authenticity being that, like, basically in Mark Carney's speech, he was saying that we're in this pretense of a rules based global order, right? And that the rules based global order is all falling apart because the pretense that 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 there's something more than just might makes right or power politics is crumbling, right? And the 1990s, why I'm talking about Kurt Cobain, why I'm going back to that moment in the 1990s, is because not just because I'm a 90s kid and I'm stuck in a puerile fantasy of regressive longing to go back to childhood. Of course not. No, that's not why I'm doing it. It's because you have to understand there's this whole thing that Bannon was doing about the gaming industry. Bannon apparently worked in the gaming industry for a while, and Bannon kind of sensed there was a sense of alienation where you had a bunch of frustrated dudes who'd be investing all this energy into leveling up characters in video games, yet feeling powerless in their ordinary lives and all this kind of stuff, right? And this is the kind of thing where you have the platonic split between a digital thing that we all participate in versus a material world, right? And there's some kind of the basic dualism between spirit and matter has forms this sort of like platonic thing, whereas there's this virtuality that we participate in video games and stuff like that, and then there's real life. And something about this, about what is going on, why people think Donald Trump is so goddamn crazy, right? Is that I've been reading this book by Naomi Klein called Doppelganger, right? That there is this mirror world, right? The doppelganger world. And that in the doppelganger world, there's a certain logic, a certain rationality that makes sense from that perspective, right? that from that perspective, it makes sense. But from everybody outside of that perspective, it's patently ridiculous. And the doppelganger thing is that there's an attempt to pull us into that universe and to convince us all that that is the legitimate perspective and it's us who are the ignorant ones. And there could also be this thing that there is, to some extent, create some weird opposition that has created. There's a certain ignorance that comes out of that opposition, right? There's even if. Then this leads to all sorts of people wanting to not be polarized and not take sides and stuff like that. But of course, part of the problem of what we see is a very polarizing situation where it's like there's either you can see the rationality of the logic that is running this sort of way of thinking, and that you either can affirm that and accept that reality, or else you can say that's obviously just a load of bullshit, right? And one of the things about this is that what I think made the Mark Carney speech so powerful was it was sort of like one of the first times that a politician has been able to like break through that wall of bullshit and present somebody who seems like they are at least attempting to address the problem, right? And one of the things that comes to mind, if anybody needs any assistance, any help with coming to terms with what I'm trying to talk about, is that I have, for a long time, one of the things that through all these changes that go on in life, it seems like there's a filmmaker named Adam Curtis who's been making documentary films just the whole time. The first one that I was introduced to was in the aftermath of September 11th. There were a lot of people who were conspiracy theorists or people that were bugging out about September 11th. And in the midst of this, Adam Curtis became popular because you're like, a lot of this could be garbage, but this Adam Curtis guy has a certain degree of integrity. And you're hanging out with a bunch of art school kids or like people who like the music and stuff like that. You know what I'm trying to say? Like that's where Adam Curtis sort of comes from, and he's been there since the war in Iraq. I mean, going back to he was doing stuff in the 90s. I first heard about him in the 2000s era, right? So it's Adam Curtis, that documentary filmmaker. If you have not heard about him, I would suggest you watch Adam Curtis, because there's something about the whole thing that's going on right now that I have to say that the problem with doom scrolling or spending too much time on the internet keeping up with the news is that if you have been watching these Adam Curtis movies, it's like you suddenly get the sense that you're like, another one of these like we're in it again. We're in the goddamn Adam Curtis universe, right? And the thing about this is that people are kind of like, has the world gone fucking nuts? But if you look actually at what the U.S. government has been doing for a long period of time, it's actually always been this crazy. It's just been normalized. And the whole thing about, he did this great documentary called Hypernormalisation, right? And the thing about and this is what Mark Carney was alluding to, with everybody kind of knows something's bullshit, but we're all just putting our sign on the wall to accept the bullshit. And that the problem is that Mark Carney is also the elite banker who worked for the Bank of England. And the bankers tend to be the ones that if you're working at the folk politic level and you're going to hang out with a bunch of this is what I'm trying to say, is that Kurt Cobain is like one of these guys who, if you are a blonde guy, guitar player, you're loud and obnoxious, and you're given, you're in a structure where people are going to give you the stage, and you don't even have to play, you don't have to be very talented, you can just be a fucking drunk, fucked up idiot and slam on the distortion pedal, and you'll make a whole bunch of money, and you just have this burnout, nihilistic attitude of like, this is kind of like the Kurt Cobain thing, right? The thing about this is that there's all these guys, like after the Kurt Cobain moment, it quickly became this thing where you had Nickelback, right? You know what I'm trying to say? As with that removed, and then this is obviously this corporate rock bullshit that nobody likes. sorry if I'm just sound like a boring hipster or whatever, but this is basically it from my perspective. This is what I grew up with, and from a rock and roll perspective on the situation, there's like there's a bunch of guys who get sucked into MAGA or that kind of movement because it's like the fear of the great white replacement is that they have this at some basic level. This is kind of the point of Nirvana and Kurt Cobain, is that you already accept that if you accept the structure as it is and try to become the rock star figure in that system, you kind of look like a jackass, right? And there's something about this where it's like there's all these guys who have this like basic like white guy loudmouth jackass quality, and the thing about it's like they there's something there's this Kurt Cobain song that was released that was like or this Nirvana song that was like an unreleased one called "You Know You're Right," right? And it's like this is like there's all the if you're working at this level, we are actually meeting if you're connecting with other human beings. This is what I'm trying to say, is that I'm seeing a lot of people talking about it at this level with like, instead of we need to localize and we need to collaborate and we need to connect with other people and all this kind of stuff. But when people, if you are a blonde white guy and you have to constantly work against yourself to make yourself submissive and just let everybody else do the work. Because if you don't, you come across like you're a guy who knows, like, I know it all. I know the answer. I know the solution, and basically everybody just needs to listen to me and submit to it. It's basically this thing where it's like there's one thing about like everybody seeing what's going on and everybody understanding the problem, but then there's this whole problem about the power dynamic of like how we're going to solve this, make the solution. And then it's like even if everybody's on the same team, there's these internal power dynamics, right, that play off each other. And the thing about it is that organizing at the local level becomes really obnoxious because you have all these guys who are basically alienated, who are just acting out for attention, and they become trolls for the right wing or whatever, right? And there's something about like, but the problem about this is that like, there's something incredibly frustrating about this, because it's like there's something, if you were to like meet with your bros, collect with your brothers and stuff like that, trying to understand the problem can only go so far. But before you start getting into this power dynamic where that devolves into a bunch of petty infighting and basically everybody atomized as a bunch of like the loneliness epidemic, isolated, nobody has any, you're all just on your own, and you have to man up, and you're not supposed to, I don't know. There's something about Aries which is very individualistic, that it's just like the whole situation. This is basically the problem that we're dealing with, right? And I have to admit that I'm kind of maybe self-critiquing, self-diagnosing a little bit, or at least trying to notice patterns that I've seen around this with other people. So anyways, we're into 2026 now. A lot of this, so what I'm trying to say here is that we had this retrograde back into Pisces, and I've been just lost into this trip of listening to too much Kurt Cobain, Nirvana stuff, and as a coping mechanism for what's going on. And to just get in on this like Saturn, Neptune, Pisces vibe while it's still there, basically, right? Like if that's what Saturn and Neptune is all about, you might as well give that some sort of like capacity to play itself out or whatever. But it's a bummer, it's a drag, and looking at what's going on in the world stage is also feels like a bit of a bummer, also feels like a bit of a drag. But there's this dynamic where the illusion that was propping it all up is starting to disintegrate, but there is the doppelganger thing is I think it largely comes down to an attempt to control the narrative of what is going on in such a way that certain options are eliminated. And obviously, a lot of this has to do with the neo-reactionary movement as a kind of reaction to the values of egalitarianism and social justice that are associated with the progressive movement, with postmodern intellectualism, all this kind of stuff, to something that is more. That's why there's this alienation of the humanities. There's a fracturing going on where there's for some reason there's a lot of hostility between people who hold a certain set of values and other people who hold a certain set of values, and instead of having there's in that there's some sort of there is of course the perspective that you can see some there's the Palantir, Peter Thiel, the horrible thing is turning this into a strategy of being post-political, right? Of like, instead of being inherently left-wing or right-wing, that there is certain things that are just going to happen regardless. And that like the idea is that from a corporate level of the military industrial complex, basically, and technology, that they're trying to build a tech structure that happens, they're arguing as a post-political level, basically, right? But there's a certain kind of in the move, for example, for Elon Musk to take Tesla to Texas rather than out of California because of transgender stuff, and then there's the decision to take Plato out of the Texas. There's this thing about Texas. I have to admit, they had that slogan, "Don't mess with Texas," but now Texas are messing with Plato, you guys. Can you guys sort of like see the ramifications of this situation? Texas are messing with Plato. Texas have rejected Plato and philosophy and ethics and the humanities, and are basically see themselves as the superior answer to a bunch of weak, effeminate intellectuals who need to be destroyed, apparently. And this is basically what we're up against. Okay, so in the midst of all of this, I'm a British Columbian Canadian, and I'm at least happy that Carney had a good speech. But this is basically, I think it's a good, like a pivotal moment in our history that we can see that in just a couple days, we're going to have this ingress here. Neptune, the fantasy, right? The fantasy, the lie that you believe to make your reality more comfortable. The bullshit narrative that you tell yourself is starting to fall apart. And our guy, Mark Carney, who I decided to vote for, basically, if you don't get, there's something about this too, where I am annoyed by all these other dudes who are basically like, that I have to deal with that don't like Mark Carney. And like, this is from the Kurt Cobain perspective. It's like, yeah, you're right. You're very, there's these guys that have this like attitude that you just have to let them dominate everything. They're right. They know all the answers. Just listen to them. They're also, and it's basically, if you listen to them, they basically will just say it's might makes right, and listen to us or we will squash you, basically, right? And this is the breakdown of the rules-based order, right? And part of the breakdown of the rules-based order is that if you understand, like if you are, let's say, a musician, and that you're working within a system and you understand the rules of the system and how to succeed and stuff like that, you can understand there's a certain bullshit quality to everything that is, and it's like by just being, that makes it so that the people who are most successful come off like they're fucking kind of morons. They're kind of idiots, right? But then if you just take that sort of being angry, like what can you do about it? Just being angry about it. If that was as easy as it was, that would have changed it a long way ago. Just being pissed off that the people that are successful within that system come off like they're fucking morons doesn't actually change it, right? And you could have a whole bunch of people that are really angry about it. It doesn't change it either, right? Because at some level, this is the kind of thing that with it. Is structured that way, right? That, and this is the whole thing, is that there's a certain sense of self-righteous rage and indignation and stuff like that, that it's like, it helps to temper this sort of attitude that you know you're right with maybe, you know, I mean, Tom York, Radiohead, did one called I Might Be Wrong, right? I mean, there's this, the other thing is the kind of act of like submission that maybe I'm not right? Maybe I don't have the answer. Maybe I don't know what's going on, right? And one of the things that I have to admit that I had a certain phase where I wasn't really involved with political stuff very much. I just decided, I had some mental health shit going on, so I decided I'm not going to stress myself out about it. I'm going to unplug for a while, right? And I have to admit, I'm thinking, you know, if it's necessary, I'll take a break from this. If it's necessary, you know, maybe I'll find other projects to invest my time in if it's too stressful to do this astrology shit. But I'm kind of I find it helpful to give myself an outlet to express what's going on that isn't like trying the folk political level. You're just going to deal with a bunch, you're going to like get to the hippie men's group thing and you're going to have a bunch of like acoustic guitar folk player guys who are like, I'm going to like sit you down. I'm going to like sing you a song about the sailor's journey. And this is my tale of my life and my aunt. And you're just going to like beat you over the head with all this like narcissistic white guy bullshit. And they're going to be like, I have the answer. Let's all join together, brothers. And we'll save the fucking universe. But it's like, it's just a bunch of narcissistic bullshit and nothing actually gets accomplished, right? And so it's like, or that a lot of the politics right now is that the academic culture, white guys are the anti-woke mob, are basically a bunch of these like kind of acoustic guitar player people who want to have the spotlight, want to be the guy who's on center stage, want to be like, wants to, if you're watching this and you're paying attention this whole thing, I basically tricked you into giving me your attention. So I have to say that there's a certain irony here. Like, this is what the Mark Carney thing is that by me participating in this whole arrangement, I'm kind of participating in this very system that is part of the problem. Right? Because I'm like, what am I doing? What about this is productive aside from me just getting some kind of attention and me just having an opportunity to express myself, right? Well, I'll answer my own question with that, is because I'm not just expressing my opinions here. I'm looking at what's going on in astrology, which, regardless of what my opinions are, the planets are going to be in a certain position whether I like it or not, okay? And based on that principle that the planets are going to be doing some shit whether I like it or not, that gives me a map that I can look at what's going on this year compared to what was going on last year and give me some ideas of how to psychologically prepare myself for whatever is going to happen, right? Now, this could be, now one of the things about this, why I was showing you the thing about last year is to sort of like help you guys to understand that people might sensationalize this based on how fucking crazy everything seems right now. But I did this thing where I showed you that Saturn and Neptune went into Aries last year to say that we're kind of just doing the loop-de-loop on this one, if you get what I'm saying, right? We're kind of just we already have been fucking dealing with this, and one of the advantages to the fact that we had this retrograde and we're doing it again is that if you have a whole year to be familiar with a certain dynamic, then that gives you the time and energy to develop some sort of strategies or ways to kind of cope and deal with it. And there's this kind of thing that happens where there's all sorts, like the Naomi Klein shock doctrine thing is that there's all sorts of traumatic things that happen that are like shocking and or whatever. And the thing about it is that there's this idea that with this is this kind of MK Ultra thing, right? Where they use shock treatments or drugs or whatever to shock people and then try to put them into a suggestive state where they can make some big change, and the person is too disabled or non-functional to deal with it, and then they become reprogrammed, basically. And this is basically why a lot of people were freaked out, a lot of conspiracy theorists were freaked out about the Great Reset thing, because it sounded like that fucking shock doctrine stuff, right? The thing about this is that despite the fact that there are certain shocking things that happen, it's like the actual dynamics that we're dealing with aren't really changing all that much, right? If you're talking about like the problems in Minnesota, we're talking about or Trump talking about the Insurrection Act. Last time this happened was with Rodney King, right? There's some kind of the thing about the shock doctrine is that there's like they're trying to like throw these things at you, like Greenland, like different events, or like the Venezuela thing, right? The all sorts of different stuff to be like, whoa, it's a game changer. The game is done changed. What are we gonna do now, guys? What are we gonna do now? It's a whole different ballpark. I don't know what to do. I guess we can't do anything. We're just gonna have to like passively sit here and watch and just see what happens, right? And then as you do this, you start to say like, well, even if there's certain like they're trying to. What's also funny is that, for example, I don't want to make light or downplay what happened recently in Minnesota. But the fact that the real difference was just a racial difference, well, I mean, there's a certain kind of, or that it could be a political difference, right? There's like, the thing is, police brutality is not really like, oh my God, it's a whole new game plan, right? A whole new game change. It's like the same fucking bullshit. And it's just like, and then the whole funny thing too about the whole conspiracy theory stuff is that there's always, with Epstein files, is that there's always this like, they made it a law that they had to release the whole thing and they didn't, and now they're in contempt of court and they're doing a whole bunch of sketchy illegal shit. This is, if anything, this is the big thing, right? Is that the rules-based order is the whole pretense to America is that democracy is supposedly a progression, an evolution away from the old monarchical or imperial forms of power, and democracy is supposed to be inherently better than that, and that the virtues of democracy are to be its own argument for why that justifies it over other systems, right? And if the whole, obviously it's not working out very well, okay? So there's a sort of like anti-democratic thing where if Donald Trump is eliminated, the people that support him are going to claim that it's undemocratic. That the problem about this is that regardless of there's enough people who identify as Americans who are in agreement and are basically complicit with the whole game plan of the Trump regime, basically, right? And the whole thing about that is, in order to make that work in your head, you have to buy into a certain version of reality in which that would make sense in some kind of way, right? And the thing about this is that this is where the doppelganger thing comes in. The Steve Bannon, who's the architect of this madness, is a guy who got this idea from working in the gaming industry and being all like, people have all this resentment because instead of having a tangible impact in real life, they waste their time in a virtual make-believe. And so we need to take this resentment that's in this virtual make-believe thing and bring that into politics in the way that Greenland, even if Greenland is obviously bullshit, it's a way for a bunch of resentful Americans to express their resentment towards the World Economic Forum, right? So, but it's like when you're thinking about like if you're imagining this, how it comes off is that if you're thinking about like the threat of somebody hitting you with a real sword that would kill you, versus the embarrassment and shame that comes from, for example, I'm just going to give an example. Do you remember the Star Wars kid who made a video of himself with the lightsaber, and like he's like a fat kid and he's like twirling a lightsaber around, and it's like every child or every boy, there's this boyish kung fu martial arts machismo thing, and this is reinforced through video games and all this kind of stuff. That I've been playing Elden Ring, even there's a part of me that like, I'm not immune to it. I can just play, I'm getting into Elden Ring and Dark Souls because I get into, swinging swords, being in the big suit of armor, big macho. Like the thing is that there's a whole bunch of guys, Steve Bannon was trying to say that like, there's a whole bunch of guys who have all this anger and resentment and it's bound up in this kind of thing. And it doesn't have any bearing on the actual real politics. And what he's trying to do is he's trying to take that resentment and transfer it from one virtuality into another, right? But that virtuality that he's transferring it into has the same quality of being like Europe is probably going to be as threatened by threats on Greenland from America as they would be if you were approached in a back alley by the fat kid twirling the Darth Maul Star Wars. It just looks fucking ridiculous. It's hard to take seriously. It looks goofy, okay? So there's something about this whole dynamic where on the light side of it is that it's like a fucking gong show. It's hard to take seriously, right? Because there's a difference between playing a video game or a fantasy of resentment versus things that are realistic that you would actually do, okay? And the thing is, part of the problem is that you have a bunch of resentful people who are alienated from that process of what the realistic things to do are. This is the outcome. You have people expressing, like, you have things that are probably not going to materialize that are basically just expressions of a lot of hostility, anger, and resentment because there's been a deliberate political strategy to try to divest one energy bound up in entertainment industry into a real politic, basically. And this is turned into basically the reality TV approach of the Donald Trump administration, where basically the strategy is that if you run your government as if it was a reality TV show, then and also running it like a business, that you're doing good because the stock market is doing good. And so after a whole year of craziness, you can go to the World Economic Forum and say, well, if we're doing so bad, look at the stock market. It's doing great. The stock market is just wonderful. So it all worked out. So you guys should trust us, right? You guys should see that this is just going to be how it is from now on. And, the bankers are going to be happy, right? So you can chill the fuck out, right? But the problem about this is this whole rationale is based on the fact of using America as the stable currency to support the rest of the world's banking system. And basically what's happened now is a transition away from that, the end of the American hegemony, and it looks awfully a lot like this. Okay, I'm going to put it this way. Have you guys ever played the game Magic the Gathering? In Magic the Gathering, a collectible card game, I have to admit, you guys, I sold my Magic cards off because I I'm terrible at those kind of games. I'm just not good at collectible card games or strategy games. It's not my forte. So I'm, but I do like the idea of having, like, you have, it's like similar to tarot cards in the way that you have these different elements. You have, but in Magic there's five, right? To make it a little bit different, but they have different kinds of. You have mana. You collect your lands. You tap your lands to cast creatures, summoning creatures or enchantments or spell casting or all this kind of stuff. So there's a number of things you can do, right? And in Magic the Gathering, you can attack with your creatures, which would be like you are the wizard and you're commanding your army and you're sending your troops out to fight the other people's troops. But then the other things like the spells and enchantments are more like coercive tricks you can play on the other side, right? And one of the things that you could do would be like cast a spell where all your creatures are going to be tied up fighting each other, so then you can like steamroll past them and do what you want, right? And I think that any nerd who plays video games, who's hip to basically, for one thing, Steve Bannon's strategy, where he's taking you see what I'm saying? He's taking that virtuality, transferring one virtuality into another, right? And the idea of these nerd strategy tactics of like, that you can see that there's like different. If you think about you're playing a collectible card game and you have all kinds of different maneuvers to make, and then it's not just all about what happens at the most creature combat level, right? And so we can see this with Donald Trump, where there's always this threat of escalating to a higher level, but he keeps it at the trade war thing, and then this has let the European economic or the World Economic Forum to develop a EU trade bazooka to use against to punish the Americans economically. But this has basically devolved into a position where the trade has been weaponized, the economy has been weaponized, and the rationale of Donald Trump is that Trump will be able to take over the North America and Greenland and basically the whole continent by using the economy, rather than using the economy in a way to give people what they want, to weaponize the economy against people, so that instead of making trade being something that helps people, trade is now a way to put sanctions and punish people for to exert power on them, basically, right? And we've had a whole year of this, so this is the outcome of where we're at now. And part of this whole thing with like Mark Carney was talking about the disintegration of the rules-based order is because what you're looking at is a system of quid pro quo crony politics in the way that's basically like rewarding the people who donate to you, or essentially having a system of people who are complicit with an agreement of bribes and power dynamics that act as we're stronger together, we're weaker if we're apart, right? So what we're basically left with is that a system that's all about kind of positive reinforcement, where you have people that are above you in a position of domination, and if you do what they like, they'll reward you. If you do what they don't like, they'll punish you, and that you, as basically a peasant or a serf, don't have any say in any of this. You just have to basically put up with it, and that you will get economic rewards for doing good things. You'll get economic punishments for doing bad things, and this is all just to make. And there's also a whole system of rules and orders that exist mainly for the people, to control the people that are in that system, because if you have enough money, you can do whatever you want, right? This is basically what people resented capitalism for this reason, because there was this pretense that we had an egalitarian system where there was freedom and liberty for everybody, that rules would be enforced fairly, that we were all free and equal. But it's now revealed that this is not the case. And we have a new era of power politics, basically. With Mars and Aries, there is also the the archetype in tarot of the emperor, right? If the tarot card association with this is the emperor, and if you are a, if you, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to tell you that I've been making these astrology videos for a while, and if we, let's just rewind, okay? Let's just rewind a bit. Take a look at what's been going on over these last few years. Just to, because for everybody's got Aries somewhere in their chart, right? So like we've been dealing with eclipses in Aries, right? When the eclipses were in Aries, I was motivated to do some therapy online, right? Because I know that I have, it was a nodal return for me, and having eclipses on your nodal return helps to sort of maybe expand your regime of coping mechanisms, right? So, but we've already been through that, right? So this is what I'm trying to say is that there's a certain part of the chart that is going to be getting some heavy traffic from Saturn and Neptune, but we've had the eclipses in there before this. And if we keep going back, I'm going to show you Jupiter right now is in Cancer, right? So if you think about when Jupiter was in Aries, that is like a square by sign to where it is now, right? Turning the Jupiter clock back to 2023, we have Jupiter in Aries with Chiron. See, one of the things about this, I have to admit, is that I'm taking care of my old dog, and one of the things that happened around this is that I have Aries 6th house, and 6th house rules things like health, it rules things like pets, and last year when we had the Saturn, Neptune, and Aries, we had to put a dog down, okay? And the thing about this is it's kind of interesting because one dog was a bit older than the other one, and the younger of the dogs is doing pretty good for health, but I'm a bit concerned that she has cataracts, basically, and that I've had, in our history of family dogs, there's a pattern where the dogs get diabetes, they have cataracts in their eyes, and we put them down, and I'm a little bit worried that maybe my dog has diabetes, but we took her to the vet not that long ago, and they got blood tests. I don't think the dog has diabetes, but the dog is there's something about seeing the cataracts in your dog's eyes reminds you of the uncomfortability of your attachment to your pets, and that, like I also have a couple cats, you know what I'm trying to say? There's a lot of that kind of dynamic to it for me personally. But this is something small. This is a small scale of like your home and your family, your personal life. It's not the big world scale, right? But we have our personal attachments and we have our big global communal collective attachments. You know what I'm saying? It is what it is. We all have to deal with this stuff, right? So if we wind this thing back, we also can go back to the Saturn Neptune or Saturn Jupiter conjunction that happened in 2021, which is important. This is another thing to sort of factor in for another number of reasons. Here we go. Saturn Neptune conjunct in Aquarius at the 1 degree, right? At 2020, right? So this is like peak COVID era, and that you can see that astrology works because regardless of whether you use tropical astrology or if you use sidereal astrology, you still have these planetary conjunctions. It's just a matter of how you're mapping them onto whatever sign, right? And that the signs aren't necessarily the same thing as constellations, because signs are signs are divided into these equal chunks. Constellations are not, right? So Saturn and Neptune in Aquarius marked this big shift that happened during COVID. And one of the other things about this is that there's another Saturn-Neptune conjunction like this around the time that Ronald Reagan got into office. And a lot of what you're seeing right now is the political order that was instigated in the Reagan and Thatcher years falling apart. And part of this is because of the inherent bullshit of it being a kind of a fantasy. Ronald Reagan was a Hollywood actor. There's a certain degree of Hollywood dreamy fantasy about this sort of reality that they were creating. And at this point, basically, the shock isn't really that anything new or different is happening, but rather that the power dynamics that were there the whole time have begun to show themselves, right? And that this is kind of like what people are uncomfortable about the World Economic Forum because of the Great Reset and all this kind of stuff, is that the Reagan thing that happened with astrology, you can see that the Reagan thing is obviously coming to an end. And now that you've got Mark Carney making that speech like that, he's doing this thing it's almost like breaking the fourth wall, right? Like, we're all playing a game, and within the rules of the game that we're playing, we have to kind of play make-believe. But Mark Carney did this thing where he's kind of breaking the fourth wall, and he's saying, I'm like kind of acknowledging that the people who are going to be watching this are probably going to be judging him for being a banker and judging the whole bullshit of the situation. And he's making a reference to be like, look, I don't take you people for idiots. I know, it's like, I know what you people are watching. I know what you think about us banker guys. He's doing this thing where there's this thing about, like, people liked Trump because Trump apparently told it like how it was honest, was brutally honest or something. But now Trump is basically lost in a kind of like nerdy white boy resentment fantasy, and Carney is doing this thing where he's breaking the fourth wall, and he's standing in this position where everything's very, like, Carney is dropping the red pill, guys, in the middle of the World Economic Forum, right? And there's something about this which is like the real meaning of what the Matrix was about was this sort of acknowledgement of the system that you are in, and the fantasy that is like the Kool-Aid that we all have to drink to sort of ignore the power dynamic and live in a comforting illusion. And that is all beginning to wear thin. The power dynamic is starting to show itself. But the problem is that the rules-based order is that, the whole point of this is that the police and the problems with police brutality, which are obviously not new, are what gives the police the pretense that they have the authority, or they have the agency, they have the right to do anything that they do, is that they are representing a legitimate authority, right? And the whole problem about this red pill, blue pill stuff, or whatever, is that if everything is just brutal power dynamics without the believing in values or principles or some higher meaning to guide what you're doing, and if the pretense to that has all been, what that does is that takes away the representatives of authority's legitimacy, and it doesn't give the people a meaningful reason to respect anything that they're doing, right? And that it ends up making them look like people that are just trying to enforce dominance by sheer force alone, but it's dominance that's been hollowed out, right? It's like the empty suit of armor that doesn't have a person in it anymore. It's just a empty shell that has no meaning. And there's the thing about the meaning that you're supposed to have this sort of humanistic meaning that plugs into the mechanistic shell and anchors it into a vertical awareness of higher principles. But it's that whole thing which is represented. I was playing the game Elden Ring, and in order to advance the boss, you basically have to set fire to the goddamn tree of life, which is like this whole anxiety that people have, that we have this vertical order of hierarchy and rules and sense making and legitimacy. And this is all collapsed into a free fall into a winners takes all, might makes right. But it's the fantasy of a bunch of resentful nerds, basically, right? And that the only thing that gives it a legitimacy is that, like, if you're fucking making moves against Plato, man, you know, it's that should be a red flag in terms of, like Plato in ethics. We don't need no ethics. We don't need no Platonic idealism. It's just the brutal reality of bare life as it is, and survivalism, basically. Apparently, right? Without any higher legitimacy than that, you know. I don't know this. I don't know how long this is going to be. I'm just doing my best to sort of tell it like it is, anyways. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm planning to keep doing this, but I'm starting to wonder if, you know, I might divert my energy to some other projects or something like that. Or if, I don't know, I'm kind of wondering, like, there might be, I'm kind of anticipating that maybe there might be people who might just decide to opt out of the whole YouTube thing or whatever, right? So as it is, I'm still doing this. Thanks for watching. See you next time.